Welcome to this deep dive.
Thank you. And if you are joining us today, you really are stepping into a massive, frankly, overwhelming stack of source material.
Yeah, it paints one of the most clinically unsettling pictures in modern forensic history, really.
It does. We have everything from early criminal profiles to hundreds of pages of translated trial transcripts.
Right, plus the historical archives covering post-Soviet Moscow.
Exactly. And perhaps most chillingly, the highly detailed psychiatric evaluations from Russia's premier facility, the Serbsky Institute.
And what we are looking at today through all these sources is the life, the pathology, and the calculated atrocities of Alexander Pichushkin.
A name that carries a lot of dark weight.
It really does. You might recognize the monikers, the global media attached to him, the Chessboard Killer, or the Bitsevsky Park Predator.
But our mission for this deep dive, it goes far beyond just recounting a ledger of violence. We aren't here just to list out a timeline.
No, we're putting on the clinical hats of forensic psychologists today.
Right. We need to dissect the twisted internal logic of a man who equated the act of ending a human life to, well, the basic physiological need for oxygen.
Which is just a terrifying concept to even approach.
It is. We are going to examine how a sprawling, densely forested green space right in the middle of Moscow was transformed into a private hunting ground.
And we'll explore why an obsessive fixation on a 64-square grid dictated a horrifying body count.
And critically, we have to look at the systemic failures. How did societal blind spots allow a predator to hide in plain sight for years?
Because the reason you should care about the mechanics of this case, why it matters, is that understanding Pichushkin is an absolute masterclass in recognizing predator methodology.
It forces us to confront how someone can manipulate our most hardwired empathetic instincts.
Like the innate human desire to comfort a stranger who is mourning a lost pet.
Yeah, that specific lure he used, it strips away the comforting illusion that profound psychological darkness always looks like a monster.
Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly ordinary neighbor, just a polite young man sitting quietly at a chess table in the courtyard.
Hiding entirely in plain sight.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how that mask was built, we have to start with the forensic origins of his pathology.
The early years.
Right. So Alexander Yurievich Pichushkin was born on April 9, 1974. This was in Mytishi, just outside Moscow.
And he was raised in a cramped, multi-generational apartment on Khersenskaya Street.
Yeah. And the foundational notes in his early profile, they describe an initially sociable, entirely ordinary child.
Completely normal developmental milestones early on.
But at age 4, there is a catastrophic physical event that fundamentally rewrites his developmental trajectory.
This is the turning point.
He falls backward out of a playground swing. And as he tries to stand up, the heavy seat swings back and strikes him directly in the forehead.
And when we look at that specific injury through a neurological lens, the implications are just profound.
Because of where it hit.
Exactly. That heavy swing struck his prefrontal cortex. Now, in human neuroanatomy, the frontal lobe is essentially the command center for our executive functions.
It regulates impulse control.
It manages aggressive behavior, and crucially, it is the hardware required for moral reasoning and the simulation of empathy.
So when a 4-year-old child whose skull offers only a fraction of the structural protection of an adult's sustains severe blunt force trauma to that region, the damage is catastrophic.
The brain's ability to process social and emotional data is severely, permanently compromised.
The sociable child the family knew effectively vanished.
Replaced by something else entirely. In his place, a child emerged who was characterized by chronic hostility, intense impulsivity, and an inability to regulate frustration.
And the behavioral shift was so extreme that his mother, Natalia, she couldn't keep him in the mainstream school system.
It just wasn't possible anymore.
Right. He was transferred to a specialized institute for children with learning disabilities.
And this transfer introduces a devastating sociological component to the physical brain damage.
Because children from the mainstream schools in his neighborhood, they turned him into a target.
The sources document relentless physical and verbal abuse. Neighborhood kids constantly deriding him, calling him a retard.
Which creates this highly toxic psychological compounding effect.
You have a child whose neurological machinery for regulating anger is already literally broken.
Right.
And now he is being subjected to profound daily social alienation. This goes way beyond standard childhood bullying.
It's total marginalization.
Exactly. Total marginalization of his identity during his most formative years. It planted the seeds of a deep-seated, simmering resentment toward society.
He was made to feel utterly powerless, entirely stripped of agency.
And when an individual with an impaired prefrontal cortex and developing antisocial tendencies feels powerless, they inevitably seek out alternative avenues.
Avenues to manufacture dominance over their environment.
Yes, they have to find somewhere they can be in control.
Which brings his maternal grandfather into the picture.
A very complicated figure in this timeline.
The grandfather sees the situation and recognizes that Alexander is actually highly intelligent.
He realizes the boy's cognitive potential is being squandered.
Right, because he's in an environment solely focused on managing severe disabilities rather than fostering intellect.
So the grandfather pulls Alexander out of that environment. He moves the boy into his own home.
And he introduces him to two elements that will fundamentally anchor the rest of his life.
Two very distinct coping mechanisms.
He teaches him how to drink vodka.
At a very young age.
And he teaches him how to play chess.
The introduction of chess is the psychological linchpin of this entire case.
How so?
Well, for a boy who experienced the real world as an unpredictable, humiliating place where he had zero power, the chessboard offered a pristine, controllable universe.
It's a closed system.
Exactly. It operates on strict, immutable rules. It requires strategic foresight.
And it culminates in absolute victory or defeat. There is no gray area on the board.
Right. On those 64 squares, Pichushkin wasn't a marginalized, bullied outcast.
He could be a god dictating the fate of the pieces.
And his grandfather actively nurtured this. He would take him down to Serbsky Park to play exhibition games against the older, experienced men who gathered at the public tables there.
It became his entire identity. But that fragile period of stability collapses in his late adolescence when the grandfather passes away.
The anchor's gone.
Pichushkin is forced to leave that protective bubble and return to his mother's cramped apartment on Kersonskaya Street.
And the isolation returns in full force.
The psychiatric sources detail how he attempted to self-medicate a severe mounting depression.
By consuming massive quantities of vodka. The habit his grandfather started.
Right. But he also develops a deeply disturbing behavioral outlet during this time.
This is where we see the escalation begin.
He starts carrying a video camera around the neighborhood. When he encounters local children, he films himself threatening them.
The most visceral example in the source material is footage of him holding a young child upside down by one leg.
Out of an upper-story window.
It's horrifying. He looks right into the camera lens and says, "You are in my power now."
He tells the kid, "I am going to drop you from the window and you will fall 15 meters to your death."
That footage is a terrifying diagnostic tool for understanding his mental state at that time.
Because the chessboard is no longer sufficient.
Right. Moving wooden pieces around a grid isn't providing the necessary high anymore to counteract his feelings of insignificance.
He is escalating to asserting physical control over actual human life to reaffirm his power.
And he reportedly kept these tapes and watched them repeatedly to soothe himself.
Using them as tangible proof that he was a force capable of instilling terror.
The death of his grandfather removed the only stabilizing emotional anchor he had.
Leaving him with the underlying neurological damage.
The festering societal resentment.
And a burgeoning, desperate need to play God.
Decades later, while sitting in a maximum security prison, Pichushkin offered a reflection on this period.
What did he say?
He claimed, "If I could have improved my childhood and youth, I would not have committed murder. It would not have been necessary."
He blamed his surroundings entirely.
He said, "My family was basically normal. It was the society that damaged me."
That self-assessment completely ignores his own lack of internal regulation.
Of course it does. It's classic narcissism.
Yeah.
But it does highlight the friction between violent ideation and action.
Right, because many people endure severe trauma and alienation without becoming prolific serial killers.
The transition from holding a kid out a window to becoming an apex predator, it requires a catalyst.
There has to be a specific moment where the internal fantasy violently breaches the threshold of reality.
And we know exactly when that breach occurs.
July 27, 1992. Pichushkin is 18 years old.
He reaches out to a classmate, a young man named Mikhail Odichuk.
And he arranges to meet him in Serbsky Park, the very place he used to play chess with his grandfather.
The case files reveal that Pichushkin had actually shared his grand, morbid fantasy with Mikhail.
He laid it all out. The proposition was for the two of them to form a partnership.
To murder 64 people together, one life for every square on the chessboard.
But as they venture into the park, Odichuk realizes this isn't just dark talk.
He realizes the danger is real. He gets cold feet, backs out, and tells Pichushkin he won't participate.
And Pichushkin responds with immediate lethal violence.
He strangles Odichek to death.
And he dumps his classmate's body straight into a sewer entrance hidden deep in the park.
The clinical detachment in his later descriptions of this event is chilling.
He equated the visceral reality of taking a life to an awakening.
He stated, "This first murder, it's like first love, it's unforgettable."
He didn't experience the panic or remorse typical of a first-time unplanned homicide.
Not at all. He experienced pure euphoria,
Because Odichuk backing out made Pichushkin feel dismissed.
perhaps even mocked. And for a narcissist with a fractured, vulnerable ego, perceived mockery is the ultimate trigger.
He eliminated the source of the mockery and proved his own dominance.
But what happens with the subsequent police investigation provides the ultimate psychological reinforcement he needed.
It made him believe he was untouchable.
The handling of that initial investigation by the authorities is a catastrophic failure.
Chief Investigator Andrei Suprunenko brings Pichushkin in for formal questioning.
Because there is witness testimony placing Pichushkin as the last person seen with Mikhail.
They were seen walking purposefully toward Bitsevsky Park.
But because Odichuk's body was dropped into the vast subterranean labyrinth of Moscow's sewer network, the police lack physical evidence.
Without a body and with Pichushkin calmly denying any involvement, claiming they simply parted ways, the authorities release him.
He walks right out the front door of the precinct, a free man.
Being interrogated and released is a profound psychological victory for a nascent predator.
The system's inability to hold him emboldened him completely.
In his internal narrative, he hadn't just overpowered his classmate.
He had outsmarted the entire apparatus of the Russian justice system.
However, following that victory, he exhibits a behavioral pattern that is relatively rare in the pathology of prolific serial killers.
A massive 9-year dormancy period.
From 1992 to 2001, there are no confirmed murders linked to him.
He integrates into society on a surface level.
Working mundane jobs, he was a grocery clerk, a warehouse worker.
If the first kill provided such an unforgettable euphoric high, a 9-year pause requires explanation.
And the source material points to two massive external factors that eventually shattered that dormancy.
Two things that pulled him back to the park.
The first is a geopolitical shift in 1996. Russia placed a moratorium on the death penalty.
This was to meet the obligations required to join the Council of Europe.
And the second factor is the looming, inescapable cultural shadow of Andrei Chikatilo,
The infamous butcher of Rostov,
who was convicted in 1992 of murdering 52 people.
The way Pichushkin processed those two factors reveals the depths of his calculated pathology.
Because the death penalty moratorium was viewed by the public as a step toward modern European human rights standards.
But Pichushkin viewed it as a safety net.
He explicitly noted that the removal of capital punishment reignited his willingness to act.
Because the absolute worst-case scenario, his own execution, was removed from the board.
And regarding Chikatilo, while the Russian populace viewed him as a source of profound national trauma,
A historical monster.
Pichushkin viewed him as a rival.
And this completely reframes his motivation.
This wasn't merely a compulsion driven by uncontrollable bloodlust.
No, it was a macabre, highly calculated competition. He wanted the title of Russia's most prolific serial killer.
The number 52 became a high score he felt compelled to beat.
So with the threat of execution gone, and a clear numerical target set, Pichushkin returns to Bitsevsky Park,
This marks the beginning of what investigators officially classify as the sewers period.
which runs from May 2001 to September 2005.
And the sheer mathematics of this period are horrifying. He attacks 36 people during this window.
36.
Only 3 survive.
The setting itself plays a crucial role here. Bitsevsky Park isn't a small, manicured city square.
Not at all. It is a massive, dense, somewhat wild forest on the southern edge of Moscow.
It serves a dual purpose for the city. By day, it's a place for families to stroll, smoke, drink beer, and walk dogs.
But by night, its unlit paths and deep foliage offer near-total isolation.
The victimology during the sewers period demonstrates the calculated, predatory nature of his operation.
He did not hunt randomly.
No. He specifically targeted the invisible demographics of post-Soviet society.
Elderly men, the unhoused, and individuals suffering from severe alcoholism.
These are people whose sudden disappearances are routinely written off by authorities as transients moving on, or individuals succumbing to exposure.
We refer to this in criminology as the less dead phenomenon.
Where a killer exploits the societal blind spots and apathy of the police force to operate without raising alarms.
And the lure he utilized to isolate these men is just a masterclass in dark psychology.
It's sickening. He would approach them, strike up a friendly conversation, and invite them to share a bottle of vodka in a secluded part of the park.
His pretext was deeply manipulative. He claimed he was mourning the death of his beloved dog.
And he asked them to join him at its grave to honor its memory.
He weaponized the cultural norm of communal drinking and the basic human instinct to offer comfort.
The specifics of the ritual are meticulously detailed in his confessions.
He consistently purchased a brand called Golden Magic Vodka. It cost roughly 38 rubles at the time.
And he specifically noted in his statements that he used this brand because he didn't want to spoil his victims before they died.
He would lead them deep into the park, wait until they were heavily intoxicated and their defensive reflexes were completely dulled, and then he would strike.
His forensic signature throughout this period was blunt force trauma.
Usually utilizing a hammer or occasionally a heavy bottle, and he always struck from behind.
He was highly pragmatic about this. He explained he attacked from the rear to avoid getting arterial blood spatter on his clothing.
Once the victim was incapacitated, and the forensic evidence suggests some were still alive and unconscious at this point, he would drag them to one of the many deep sewage pits scattered throughout the park.
And drop them in. The rushing subterranean water and the sheer depth of the shafts effectively erased the crime scenes.
The geographic reality of this is deeply unsettling.
He was operating an invisible subterranean slaughterhouse directly beneath a public recreational area.
The volume of violence he achieved while remaining undetected defies belief. In the year 2001 alone, he murdered 11 people.
6 of those killings occurred within a single month,
That represents a rapidly collapsing cooling-off period.
indicating his psychological need for the kill was escalating intensely.
The tragedy of the societal blind spot is magnified when you consider the survivors.
How does a man drop nearly 40 people down sewer shafts over 4 years without triggering a massive manhunt?
3 individuals, including Maria Viracheva and Mikhail Lobov, actually survived his attacks and managed to escape the sewers.
But due to their marginalized status, their trauma and their reports failed to trigger an effective investigative response.
The system's apathy provided him with a shield of impunity.
The methodology of the sewers period kept him safe and anonymous for 4 years.
But in late 2005, a dramatic shift occurs.
The careful, shadow-dwelling predator entirely abandons the tactics that had guaranteed his freedom.
To understand this sudden pivot, we have to look closely at the central piece of physical evidence recovered from his apartment following his eventual arrest.
We need to pause the timeline to fully unpack the why driving Alexander Pichushkin.
When investigators finally executed a search warrant on his Kersenskaya Street apartment, they discovered a physical chessboard.
Written on the squares of the board were dates. He had filled in 63 of the 64 squares.
The Chessboard Killer wasn't just a sensationalist nickname generated by the press.
It was his literal physical blueprint. He was driven by a rigid compulsion to complete the grid.
The psychiatric evaluations dive heavily into his life and death philosophy.
He articulated a belief system where the act of deciding who lived and who died elevated him to a godlike status.
One of the most revealing quotes from the trial transcripts captures this perfectly.
He stated, "In all cases, I killed for only one reason. I killed in order to live. Because when you kill, you want to live."
And he added, "For me, a life without murder is like a life without food for you."
If we place that philosophy into the broader context of criminal psychology, we see distinct parallels with other philosophical killers.
Like Ian Brady, the Moors murderer.
Exactly. Brady synthesized misreadings of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche to convince himself he was an intellectual superior operating on a plane above conventional moral law.
Pichushkin constructed a similarly articulate, terrifying framework.
He wasn't operating in a state of disorganized psychosis or frenzied hallucination.
He intellectually rationalized the slaughter.
He even described himself as the father of his victims, claiming he was the unique entity who opened the door for them to another world.
This God complex fundamentally separates him from standard, sexually motivated serial killers.
He viewed his violence as a deific decree, a necessary function of his superior existence.
That deep-seated God complex provides the context for the terrifying behavioral shift that inaugurates what investigators call the open period.
Running from October 2005 to June 2006.
Pichushkin decides that dropping bodies into the dark, rushing water of the sewers is no longer sufficient.
He completely stops hiding the victims.
He begins leaving the brutalized remains right out in the open, on the paths and clearings of Serbsky Park.
Concurrently, the violence of the attacks escalates into grotesque overkill.
His new forensic signature involves delivering repeated hammer blows to crush the victim's skull,
Followed by taking an empty vodka bottle or a thick wooden stick and violently wedging it directly into the gaping cranial wound.
That specific escalation in physical desecration indicates a profound psychological shift.
His need for public recognition and infamy had completely overridden his instinct for self-preservation.
He wanted the morning joggers to find the bodies. He wanted the authorities to see his handiwork.
He craved the visibility because, in his mind, a god does not hide his power in a sewer.
But the most alarming aspect of the open period is the radical change in his victimology.
He stops hunting the invisible, marginalized strangers who protected his anonymity.
He begins hunting people within his own social sphere.
Acquaintances, former coworkers, men he casually played chess with.
In fact, 10 of his victims during this final period lived in his exact same four-building residential complex on Kersenskaya Street.
The logistical audacity of murdering 10 of your own neighbors is difficult to comprehend.
He is inviting them for walks, killing them in the nearby park, and casually returning to the same apartment building without raising suspicion.
The psychological terror this inflicted on the Moscow community, specifically the residents near Bitsevsky Park, was paralyzing.
The media saturates the public with warnings about the Bitsa beast and the Bitsevsky maniac.
The true horror for those residents wasn't just the abstract fear of a monster lurking in the woods.
It was the slow, creeping realization that the monster was integrated into their daily lives.
He was the polite young man holding the door in the lobby.
The guy carrying groceries, the quiet neighbor playing chess in the courtyard.
The arrogance driving those decisions is monumental. By intentionally targeting individuals within his immediate social radius, he is leaving a massive, glaring trail of social and interpersonal breadcrumbs.
This is a classic hallmark of a predator whose ego has entirely detached from the reality of risk.
He truly believed he was so intellectually superior, such a professional, that even if he slaughtered his own neighbors and left their bodies in plain sight, the police were simply too incompetent to connect the dots and stop him.
That unchecked arrogance brings us to June 2006 and the event surrounding his final victim.
Her name was Marina Moskayova.
She was 36 years old, and she worked at the same local supermarket as Pichushkin.
He approaches her and asks her to accompany him for a walk in Bitsevsky Park.
The case files note that Marina was acutely aware of the Bitsa Beast rumors and was actually highly suspicious of Pichushkin's invitation.
She has severe misgivings.
Before she leaves her home, she does something incredibly brave. And it is the specific action that ultimately dismantles Pichushkin's entire operation.
She leaves a handwritten note for her son.
The note explicitly contains Alexander Pichushkin's name and his personal phone number, stating clearly that she is going for a walk with him.
The detail that elevates this specific murder from a tragedy to a baffling psychological anomaly is that Pichushkin knew about the note.
He was fully aware that she had left a physical, undeniable record connecting him directly to her movements.
And despite knowing this, he proceeded to murder her anyway.
When psychiatrists at the Serbsky Institute later pressed him to explain this profound apathy toward his own capture, Pichushkin characterized the murder of Moskaliova as kind of a suicide.
He articulated that he was exhausted, severely depressed, and feeling the crushing weight of maintaining his double life.
Yet his compulsion to kill remained so overpowering that he needed to execute the act like oxygen, regardless of the inevitable consequences.
The forensic trail generated by Marina's foresight swiftly ends the nightmare.
Her body is discovered in the park on June 14, 2006.
She bears the grotesque trademark injuries of his open period, the crushed skull, and the brutalized remains left fully exposed.
But as investigators process the scene, they find a Moscow metro ticket in her clothing.
They extract the serial number from the ticket, trace the exact time and location of the purchase,
and pull the corresponding CCTV footage from the metro station.
The video is definitive. It shows Marina Moskaliova walking on the platform, accompanied by Alexander Pichushkin, just hours before her estimated time of death.
The authorities mobilize immediately, and he is arrested at his home on June 16, 2006.
The immediate aftermath of his arrest provides a fascinating window into his pathology.
Initially sitting in the interrogation room, he attempts to deny the allegations.
Falling back on the exact same tactic of calm denial that successfully kept him out of prison back in 1992.
But the moment the detectives slide that CCTV still across the table, completely destroying his alibi, the dam breaks.
And he doesn't just offer a standard confession. He aggressively claims ownership of the crimes.
He revels in the attention.
The police transport him back to Bitsevsky Park for a walkthrough, and with the official cameras rolling, he treats the crime scenes like a theatrical stage.
He eagerly acts out the murders, reenacting the specific arc of the hammer blows with disturbing precision.
He points out the exact sewer grades he utilized years prior.
He even lectures the arresting officers, telling them not to take credit for the capture.
He states, "I burnt myself, so there's no need for the cops to take credit for catching me. I'm a professional."
That theatrical arrogance doesn't diminish. It amplifies as we move into the 2007 trial.
The physical setup of the courtroom reflects the extreme volatility of the situation.
Due to the high-profile nature of the atrocities and the palpable rage of the public and the victims' families, Pichushkin is not seated at a standard defense table.
He is housed inside a reinforced glass cage situated in the center of the courtroom.
Over the course of the lengthy proceedings, evaluating the mountain of forensic evidence and his own detailed confessions, the court officially finds him guilty of 48 murders and 3 attempted murders.
Observing his behavior inside that glass cage is to observe pure, distilled narcissism in real time.
He is entirely unrepentant.
He actively smirks and taunts the grieving family members who are seated just feet away from him.
When Judge Vladimir Yusov finally reads the sentencing mandate life in prison, stipulating that the first 15 years must be served in strict solitary confinement, the judge pauses and asks Pichushkin if he understands the sentence.
Pichushkin simply glares through the glass and snaps back, "I'm not deaf."
But the detail that serves as the ultimate insult to the judicial process and the families is his persistent vocal complaint regarding the final tally.
He repeatedly interrupts the court to argue that it is unfair to only officially charge him with 48 murders.
He aggressively demands that the investigators and the judge add 11 more victims to the official record.
He wants public legal credit for 60 or more kills.
In his rigidly structured mind, if he doesn't receive official documentation proving he surpassed Andrei Chikatilo's record of 52, he has failed his own twisted game.
He is desperate for the world to acknowledge that he successfully filled the chessboard.
The findings from the Serbsky Institute evaluation presented during the trial are crucial for contextualizing this.
They officially declared Alexander Pichushkin legally sane.
This means he was not suffering from schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations, or any psychotic break from reality that would legally excuse his actions or indicate he didn't understand the morality of what he was doing.
He possessed complete cognitive awareness of his actions.
Their official diagnosis was a severe personality disorder expressed through a sadistic inclination toward murder.
This medical ruling confirms that the 64 squares, the elaborate life and death philosophy, the self-proclaimed God complex.
None of it was the byproduct of a shattered mind hallucinating demons.
It was a rigid, highly calculated framework constructed by a man who simply derived deep, sadistic pleasure from the act of destroying human life and asserting dominance.
To follow the timeline to its current conclusion, following the sentencing, Pichushkin was transported to Polar Owl, also known in the penal system as IK-18.
It is an exceptionally brutal, high-security penal colony located north of the Arctic Circle,
where he is serving out his life sentence in strict solitary confinement.
But the psychological obsession has not faded with time.
We have a chilling update from the source material dated April 2025.
At 50 years old, Alexander Pichushkin reaches out to the Russian Penal Service from his Arctic cell.
He states that he is now poised to officially confess to 11 additional murders, offering to provide the specific geographic and forensic details that investigators lacked back in 2007.
If he is formally convicted of these additional claims, his official body count will jump to 59.
Even decades later, buried in a frozen isolation cell, the psychology remains completely static.
He is still trying to fill the chessboard. He is still trying to beat Chikatilo.
It forces us to take a step back and reflect on the staggering scale and the profound senselessness of this tragedy.
48 confirmed dead, perhaps nearly 60 when all the files are ultimately closed.
It is the chilling reality of a man driven by a severe childhood brain injury, compounded by systemic social alienation, and fueled by a desperate narcissistic need for intellectual dominance.
He managed to turn a peaceful, massive city park into a grid of death.
He wasn't a phantom. He wasn't a criminal mastermind living in the shadows. He was a grocery clerk. He lived on the 5th floor of a normal building.
He weaponized our most basic, unifying human traits.
He exploited the empathetic desire to comfort a stranger mourning a lost pet.
He abused the basic trust we place in a coworker, asking to take a casual walk after a long shift.
The chessboard killer didn't simply play a game with human lives. He systematically dismantled the social contract itself, exploiting the invisible threads of trust and community that allow a city to function.
And I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over. When you walk through a busy park, surrounded by the trees and the distant hum of the city, and you see a solitary figure sitting quietly at a chess table,
consider how little we truly know about the minds of the people sitting right across from us.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.